meditation of my heart, be ever mindful of thee, O Lord, my strength and my salvation. Amen. Would you please be seated? Shirley and John just asked me, how do I feel before the start of the service? And if they'd asked me a half hour ago, I would have said great! But then my daughter texted me about 20 minutes before the service, and I want to wring her neck. So I'm going to have to work through those emotions and feelings and be a good father and a good Christian and tell you about the love of Jesus Christ. My sermon this morning is going to be on humility. It takes our gospel lessons, the first shall be last, the last shall be first, and I want to talk about what this means. I want to put the sermon gospel reading in context, and I want to talk about what it means for us today, how it works in our lives. But I got to tell you, I'm still stuck with my daughters. I thought when they graduated from college, that would be it. No more calls, Daddy, it's a crisis, I need to get my nails done, send me $25. I mean, nickel and dime and nickel and dime. And now that they're out in the world, it's no longer nickels and dimes. Claudia has taken a job in Miami. I'm very proud of her. It's a very good job. And in fact, at the age of 22, she made more than I did when I was 42. That's a different topic. And she said, Daddy, I need to find a place to live. And I found something that can, because I went through her, here's your budget, here's how much you can spend, you have to put so much aside for rent and utilities and, just basic budgeting. Figuring, I don't bother to do that, but if I can get her to do it, that's good. And so she went on her little way and she would call up and say, oh, Daddy, I found a place within your budget. It's in a place called Overtown. It looks really nice. And I said, Angel, I think we need to keep looking. So she went from Overtown to Little Havana to Little Haiti, and she would come up with these places that, Daddy, Hialeah is really a nice place. I mean, it's right near the airport, you can visit all the time. And, well, needless to say, she finally found a place, and she said, oh, but I need you to put down the last month's security deposit, because I've just started working. So I now have a home in the Coconut Grove that I'm renting for my daughter. 5 blocks from the beach. And wouldn't you know it, my daughter in Atlanta went through the same process. They must have been working in tandem. Because Laura went from the slums of Atlanta, she now lives in a condo in Buckhead, right next to the mall. Oh. So their rents on their little places are more than my rent on my little house here. But eventually, Daddy, we'll eventually be able to pay for it ourselves. But we've just started working and we have to buy clothes and the important things, so. But part of this has been packing up their rooms in the house. Things that they're going to take with them in their new homes, and things that they want to give away took some stuff over to the Key Center thrift shop, and other things that they said, well, you just hold on to that, Daddy. And one of the things that I was doing was I was boxing up these things. I've got 3 or 4 of these boxes, and they are little trophies. Oh. Indian River Soccer Association, Fall 2007. What's this? Dave Sporting Goods. No, what is this? Midget basketball. Field soccer, basketball. Here's a drama award. And I can remember as a father going Saturday mornings in the afternoons to these games of, I think it was volleyball in the fall, and I think soccer in the winter, or basketball in the winter, and soccer in the spring, and then the swimming meets and the track meets, and to the drama productions and to the choruses, all the things, and each little thing they got an award or a prize, and Laura and Claudia take after their mother. They're very athletic. Susan was a varsity athlete in college. I would go to my girlfriend's games. See, I went out for sports too, and I was the guy who held the tackle dummy for the football team. I suited up Conger, and the girls take after her. And not only would the girls participate, but they would win stuff. They would be captains of teams, and they were just so gifted athletically as well as intellectually. And as I'm putting these things together in these boxes, and Susan and I are packing up their rooms, and we started talking about what was the thing that we're most proud of. And we began to talk, and the thing that we are most proud of isn't in any of these boxes. The thing that I'm most proud of my daughters isn't a diploma on the wall or winning the Indian River Soccer Association Championship in 2006. Even though at the time they meant a great deal to me, it was a lot of fun. The thing that I remember most occurred in their first grade. Susan, being a young, energetic mother, thought she should homeschool, and so for first grade they homeschooled. Well, there was a teacher's strike for 6 months that year at homeschool. That was a joke. She absolutely despised it. In second grade, off to parochial school they went. But for the homeschool, it was really active. They would have sporting meets where all the children would get together, and they would have outings. It really was well organized where we lived. And they would have these sporting events, and Laura and Claudia, of course, would walk away with another one of these plastic things, everything they entered, little medals, little ribbons. But I remember one's track meet in first grade in particular, and they had done very well in their heats, and there's the final. And Laura and Claudia were always a head taller than all the other children. Because, Susan is very tall, and our children are not gigantic, but they take after their parents. They're larger than, stronger. They say like Steve Austin, the Bionic Man, faster, stronger, whatever. Well, they line up, and Laura and Claudia are fierce competitors. They compete. They don't care about the rest of the world. They compete. They want to beat their sister. So if I got a 97, she better not have gotten a 98. And the goal for me was always a tie, to keep peace in the house. Well, here's Laura, and then another child, and here's Claudia, and the gun sound, bam! And Laura and Claudia are straight off the blocks, and they're cruising down the thing, and all the other children are gradually falling back. And then the girl between Laura and Claudia trips and falls and starts to cry. And Laura and Claudia stop, and each of them take a hand of the little child who was their age, and the three of them, hand in hand, skip together down to the finish line. They didn't win. But from that point forward, I knew all this work had worked. Because the winner of the race is not he who comes first, but he who honors God in all things. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. You can go through life, and right now I'm packing up boxes of little plastic trophies that are never going to be opened again. They're going to be taking up space in the storage locker till I die. But who of you has got that Cadillac, or that bigger boat, or that bigger house, or that thing that you've put everything into? And are you going to be able to be buried in it? Are you going to be able to take it to heaven with you? Is it going to mean anything? I can remember when I bought my first sports car. And that was the focus of my life. Where's that thing now? It's probably in a crusher yard in Brooklyn, New York or someplace. Life passed on. Let me talk to you about our gospel reading and tell you what is important. I also want to tie it in with one of the festivals of the church. Today is the feast day of Padre Pio. Some of you who may come from a Catholic tradition may know who Padre Pio is. Most people don't, but I want to share a bit about his life. Because when he was beatified as a saint, Pope John Paul II didn't go into his miracles, didn't go into all these remarkable things he did, all these things that made him one of the most remarkable men of the 20th century. He talked about one thing, the humility and faithfulness of Padre Pio. But if you look at our Bible readings today, you can't anymore because we're cheap. We don't print those anymore. But if you take it from trust, I'm going to tell you about Mark 9. Mark 9 begins for us today in the 30th verse. And Jesus and his disciples, they've just had the transfiguration experience. They've just come off the mountaintop. Jesus, James, John, and Peter, they're up on the mountaintop. The disciples see the vision of Elijah and Moses, and Jesus is glorified and transfigured, and the voice of God speaks to them. And it's the next day. So they've come off of a mountaintop. They know this stuff is real. They know that this is more than just some charismatic leader. They have tasted and felt the power of God. And they're going for a walk. They're going for a stroll. They're not marching 12 abreast down Gulf to Lake Highway with Jesus in the middle. They're going to the town of Capernaum on a back roads path. Probably Jesus leading the pack, and then groping back 2s and 3s and 4s. And they stop, and the Mark tells us Jesus didn't want people to know where they were, because Jesus is going to teach them now, and he wants to have an opportunity not to be disturbed. And he sits down, and he tells them, the Son of Man will be betrayed, he will be killed, and on the third day he'll rise again. Now this is the second time Jesus is doing a refresher class, because the last class we heard in Mark chapter 8 verse 31 was Jesus telling the disciples this exact thing, that he is going to be betrayed by one of you, he is going to suffer and to be crucified and die, but on the third day he will rise again. Now at that time Peter says, "Not you, Lord! No way!" And Jesus rebukes Peter with the words, "Satan, get behind me." Now Jesus gives the same lesson. And Mark says, and the disciples did not understand, but they didn't say anything. I wonder why. Last time somebody spoke up and asked a question after this class, they had their head handed to them. They don't understand. Jesus is saying this now a second time. The first time Peter stands up and says, "Not you, Lord," and he gets, "No, you idiot, you got to pay attention." Now, are these men dumb? Well, we have the advantage of knowing how the movie turns out. But just put yourself in their position. If they're good and faithful Jews, they've gone to synagogue, they've gone to temple, they've gone to the equivalent of a Sunday school, they know their scriptures. Now, what do we know about the Messiah? Conflicting things. Isaiah tells us he'll be a suffering servant who will be pierced for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities. This Savior, this Messiah, will take upon himself our brokenness and suffer. Okay. But then there's the more popular stuff, the more fun stuff. We've got Daniel. Daniel chapter 7. Daniel's vision is the Son of Man. And that's the phrase Jesus uses about himself right now. Same words. The Son of Man will come with the Ancient of Days and will take over this world. And if you read Daniel, the Son of Man sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger in an action movie, or Clint Eastwood walking into town and cleaning up things. This is a manly, virile, powerful God who is a man who is going to change the world. And in the Apocrypha, which were written within 50 years, so this is current literature for these guys, in Ezra and in Enoch, we have the Son of Man coming in from the right hand of God and changing the world. And in Ezra we read that the Son of Man is going to break the teeth of the sinners, pull the wicked down from their thrones. Oh, this is great stuff, isn't it? This is great stuff. The Son of Man, this is the stuff I want to hear. I want to hear about my guy being triumphant and powerful and cleansing the world. I don't particularly want to hear he's going to suffer. Jesus is trying to tell him, it's both. It's not one or the other. Well, they don't get it, they don't understand, and they don't ask any questions. Now, when we get to the book of Acts, after the crucifixion and resurrection, guess what? They get it. And that's the preaching of the disciples that sets the world on fire because they finally get it. Well, right now they don't. And Jesus, it's in the passage says, Jesus sits them down because they finally reached a little village. They finally reached a place, and he says to them, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. We come not to be served, but to serve. Take this child. Spare child walking around. If you treat him, you treat him the way you would want to be treated yourself. Suffer the little children to come unto me. Because the way you treat this child is the way you treat me and the one who sent me, which is God the Father in heaven. These are our gospel readings today. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Let me tell you about Padre Pio. Padre Pio was an Italian, born in a little town and all the way at the bottom of Italy, a little village, sort of the Okeechobee of southern Italy. Middle of nowhere, a place where people got out of town as soon as they could. Padre Pio was one of 7 children of a peasant farming family. People didn't own their own land, they were the equivalent of sharecroppers. And this little boy, he was the special child. He was the bright child. He was the child the family was going to pin all of their hopes on. And they wanted, and because this child, at the age of 4 or 5, wanted to be a priest, wanted to serve the Lord, wanted to be a friar. Well, it takes money to be a priest. Then you had to be able to read and write. And they didn't have public schools. If you wanted to learn how to read and write, you had to pay for it. Well, they're basically hardly getting by right now. So the father and mother make the decision, he's going to go to America, to New York. And in 1905, gets on the boat and goes over to New York and spends 5 years working in New York City to make the money so that his child can be educated. And he comes home, and the child, and Padre Pio at the age of 15, goes off to what we would call high school, they call the minor seminary, and starts the process of becoming a Catholic priest. Well, World War I breaks out. And because he hadn't been ordained yet, he was still just a brother, Padre Pio was drafted. And he was made a stretcher bearer. The Italians in the First World War were on the good guys' side. They were fighting the Germans and the Austrians. But Padre Pio had been a very sickly child. He suffered from typhus, typhoid, rubella, rheumatic fever, the things that killed the peasants in southern Italy. And he was sent home by the army in 1916 because he was just too physically weak to be a stretcher bearer. And he returned to the monastery, and he returned to the church. And as a Franciscan friar, he didn't have a congregation, if you will. His job was within the life of the community. He would pray, he would hear confessions of people who wanted to have their confessions heard. He would celebrate the Eucharist. He would live the monastic life in Okeechobee, middle of nowhere. Well, in September 20th, 1918, the 100th anniversary was on Thursday. He had been hearing confessions, and he had a vision of Christ appearing to him. Because Padre Pio had been praying ever since he left the army, he felt so guilty about this. It was his job to be with the Italians. Had a really miserable time of it in the First World War. And it was his job to be with the suffering. And he prayed, Lord, may I take upon my body the sufferings of our people. May I offer myself as a sacrifice. And he had a vision of Christ appearing to him, and Christ saying to him, your life will be one of suffering. But it will be suffering to purify your soul and the souls of others to bring to them a saving faith in Jesus Christ. And after that confession, he went and celebrated Mass, and upon his body appeared the marks of the stigmata. On September 20th, 1918. What is that? Stigmata is when you have the wounds of Christ in your hands, on your side, and on your feet. Now, Padre Pio was mortified. Because, what if I got the stigmata? Next week, we'd have every coot and nut in Citrus County in this church to see the show, wouldn't we? I mean, this is better than TV. To have a bleeding priest up at the altar, my God, this stuff's great! And that's what happened. These people would flock to see him bleed, because every time he celebrated Holy Communion, he'd bleed! And then when he stopped, he'd stop bleeding. It was like he had spigots. Well, people began to complain, and the first person to complain was the pastor of the local Catholic church. Why? Because nobody was going to his church anymore. They were all gone up the hill to see Padre Pio. How's he going to pay for the round? How's he going to pay to make the world go round? He's losing his customers. Padre Pio is a fraud. He's a charlatan. Now, Italy, at that time and to this day, has a north-south divide. It's a north-south divide. Northern Italy likes to see itself as being very cultured. It's the land of Leonardo. It's the land of the Renaissance. The land of intellect and philosophy and art and culture. And southern Italy, that's all the peasants. And thank God they went to them in New York, because we don't want them in Italy. And the Italian church is sort of on a north-south divide. The bishops, the professors, the leaders, the teachers, they're all from the north and the upper classes. And the little peasants, and those people who actually take care of the peasants, are the peasants who go to the ministry. And the Italian church got really mad at Padre Pio because, man, tarot cards and the Long Island medium and all these things that give Catholicism in Italy a bad name. Now we got a priest playing along with this folk magic crap. They were furious with Padre Pio. The head of the Franciscan order came and said, this guy has got a psychosomatic illness. He is so emotionally fragile that he basically bursts because this guy is unbalanced. Other people said, before the church, he puts it in little Hollywood, and at a certain moment, squirts out in his hands. Other people said he's dropping acid onto his hands to burn himself. Now, it's not hard to want to believe that. Because the stigmata have only appeared maybe a dozen times in the history of the church. St. Francis of Assisi was one of those people. It's a unique gift of the Holy Spirit. We as a church accept that that gift happens, but there are a lot of frauds out there. There are a lot of frauds who peddle religion, who have used gifts of the Holy Spirit. The Lord is telling me that if you give me $1,000, God will give you 10,000 back. Turn on the TV and you hear people like that, don't you? Well, the church in Italy said this man's a fraud, and an investigation was launched, and they were not able to find how he did it. They investigated, they had doctors, they had psychiatrists, they had scientists, and the answer was, we don't know, but it's happening. And so, but in 1930, the Vatican said to him, the Pope said, Padre Pio, I am lifting your faculties as a priest. You may not hear confessions. You may not preach. You may not celebrate Holy Communion in public. You are to stay in your little room in the monastery. That's what they do to the perverts they catch. Lock them away in church jail. Padre Pio was locked away in the church jail. In fact, they bugged his cell. They bugged his cell because they wanted to figure out how he was doing this. This is a Catholic church in Italy. It's not the government, not investigative reporters. This is the church itself. And Padre Pio, for 6 years, was essentially locked in his cell by the church. A new pope comes in the mid-30s, and he releases Padre Pio. And Padre Pio returns to his work, which was not stepping foot outside the monastery. Celebrating Holy Communion, hearing confessions, preaching, and praying for the healing of people. And stories began to emerge of miraculous healings, and I don't need to go into all of that. Some of them, frankly, I find bizarre and I don't quite believe. Others are remarkable. Well, in the late 1940s, this Polish priest who was studying in Rome to get his PhD went on a trip to see Padre Pio. You know, hey, if I went to Houston, of course I'm going to go to listen to Joel Osteen just to say I've been there. Man, you know, it's church tourism. And this guy named Karol Wojtyła went down to see Padre Pio. And he was convinced this man was not a fraud. And they struck up a friendship and a communication. And in 1960, Karol Wojtyła, who at this time was a bishop in Poland, wrote to say, could you please pray for this woman who we've been praying for here, who has cancer, and she's going to go have surgery in about 3 weeks' time. Pray for her. And Padre Pio wrote back immediately, of course I will. Well, the woman goes in for surgery, and before her surgery, as she's being prepped, the doctors say, we find no evidence of cancer whatsoever. Well, Karol Wojtyła grew up and became Pope John Paul II. And in 1968, on the 50th anniversary of the appearance of his stigmata, every service he had celebrated, the Holy Communion, he would bleed. But on the night of September 20th, 1968, he celebrated communion, he did not bleed. And the next day he died. And when they did the autopsy, they found no evidence whatsoever that any of this had ever occurred. Now you can go to Italy, and you can see Padre Pio's body. They have in a glass coffin. He hasn't corrupted yet. In other words, it's really creepy. He looks like a wax figure because he's under its glass coffin, and he looks like he's just asleep. I mean, that's what the Russians tried to do with Lenin, but it didn't quite work. If you ever happen to go to Moscow and see Lenin in his tomb, he really does look like he's wax, because by this time he's almost all wax. Well, Padre Pio remains incorrupted in his glass tomb. Now, in 2006, when Pope John Paul beatified, made him a saint, all the things that he could have said about Padre Pio, these miracles, these this, this, that, what did the Pope talk about that was worthy of emulation for Christians? The humility of Padre Pio. When Padre Pio was locked in the church prison, his response was, I don't want this to be, but it is God's will. God will use me as God sees fit. Trust in God and allow God to use me as I am. Padre Pio was a nobody, a peasant from southern Italy. He wasn't a great theologian, he wasn't a great thinker, he wasn't one of the people who we would say is the movers and shakers of this world. He is a simple man of faith. And in 1,000 years, who from the first half of the 20th century we're going to remember from Italy? I don't think anyone will know who Mussolini was. If they do, it's some crackpot, tin pot dictator. They got a lot of them in Italy. But Padre Pio will be known. Now let me tie this all together. What does Christ call us to do? What was Christ telling his disciples? Was Jesus was he taking Kaylee from Sandy's arms and holding him up, be nice to Kaylee and I'll be nice to you? On one level, yes. But I too am that child that Christ held amongst the disciples, and you are too. John is Christ's child. We are all children of God. And every person created on this earth is a child of God. And every one of those children are deserving of respect and love and decency. Because when you treat that child, that neighbor, whether that child be an infant, whether they be 99 years old, you are treating our Lord and he who sent our Lord, God the Father in heaven. As I look back on my life, I'm not going to remember buying that first sports car, or moving into that bigger house, or getting that promotion, or all the things that at the time seemed absolutely the most powerful things I could ever be. Frankly, I couldn't tell you what half of these things are. But at the time I got them and we put them on a little shelf, they were fantastically important. What I remember, and I'll remember to the end of my life, are my children holding the hand of a little child and skipping down a road, down the field. Because those children understood. Winning a race does not mean crossing the finish line first. It means living a life in accordance with the will of God the Father. It means loving your neighbor as yourself. Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't like my neighbor. He parks in the grass. And for 3 months of the year, he's got a Winnebago, and I can't stand a Winnebago on the front lawn. I'm sorry. I didn't move to Florida to have that. Well, you know, you live with it. I don't want to love my neighbor. I don't want to love people who are wrong about issues, who don't have the wisdom to think like me. I don't want to do that, but Christ calls us to love anyway, to treat the poor, not the nice poor, not the poor that show up on church so we can say, oh, well, not Alan, he's okay, generic person, not Alan. This is one of our millionaires. But, remember pledge card time. But not the nice poor, the kind poor, the clean poor, but the people who are broken by life. We are to love them and to serve them. Not just the powerful. Not just those who think and act and look like us. But all children of God. Even if they don't know it, we are still called to love. That's hard. I don't particularly want to do it. But that is the call God makes on our life. We are called to love one another, to give of ourselves as He gave for us. Being a Christian, unless you're a realtor and looking for business by joining the congregation, you won't find any. Unless you're here under false pretenses, you're not here for any material gain. It's not going to make you fitter or younger or wealthier. It will lead you, but it will do one thing. It will answer that existential question about the meaning and purpose of your life. And it's very simple. God loves you. He died for you. You are important in the great scheme of history. And we are called to live as our Lord and love our neighbors, as I said. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. It's not a call to be a doormat. It's not a call for the meek and mild to just be bullied. It's a call to live life in strength and power, but to surrender everything to Jesus Christ. Amen. Friends, would you please stand?